Hey everyone, welcome back to another tier list. Today I'm going to be ranking the films of Oliver Stone. This is a director that I've been into quite a bit over the last few months, and I've finally gotten around to seeing his most recent film, Snowden, which I watched last night. And so I've been putting off doing this list until then. But up until a few months ago, I'd only really seen a couple of his films, like Born on the 4th of July and Natural Born Killers. I hadn't really seen anything else other than that, so it was cool to kind of see a lot of his films. They're very politically charged. A lot of them deal with conspiracy and things like that as well. He's made a few films set around the Vietnam War as well, because he was in the war, and so he has kind of first-hand knowledge about that. But yeah, like I said, a lot of political kind of films, thrillers, and things like that. But he kind of has delved into almost every genre as well. But they're just the ones, I guess, war films and political films are kind of what he's known for. He hasn't made a film since Snowden, which was 2016, so hopefully we do get another movie from him soon, which would be cool to see. But for now, let's just jump into all 20 of these films. So kicking things off, we have Wall Street, so one of his earlier films from the 80s. He had a real kind of run a string of really successful and really good films in the late 80s, and Wall Street is one of them. It stars Michael Douglas and Charlie Sheen. It's a really of its time kind of film. You can tell just by looking at it, by the technology they use, the music that's in the film, the dialogue and things like that. It's a very late 80s film, but it's really good, and it kind of reminds me of a early Wolf of Wall Street, but in a really good way. Charlie Sheen's great here, and Michael Douglas is fantastic. It's a really good film. I think it's solid. It's not quite an S tier film, but it's definitely a solid A tier. Yeah, really good film from the 80s that I would highly recommend. And yeah, these are all portrait-sized pictures, by the way, as well. They're not my usual kind of poster size, but that's okay. We'll ignore that. Next up, we have his very first film, which probably a lot of people haven't seen. It came out in the 70s, in 1974. It's called Seizure. It's a horror film. It's really bad. It's terrible. It's the worst film he's made. Most people probably haven't seen it because his career kind of took off in the mid-80s when he did two films back-to-back, Salvador and Platoon, which he's really well known for. But before that, he made this film, and he also made another horror film called The Hand, which we'll get to. But Seizure is just terrible. There's nothing good about it. It's an F-tier film. It's really bad for a first film, and I wouldn't recommend it unless you're going through all of Oliver Stone's films like I did. Terrible characters. The filmmaking looks bad. It just looks like a handheld kind of camera that it was shot on. It's not interesting at all. Yeah, I wouldn't bother with that film. Next up, we have The Doors. This is a pretty solid film that he did, obviously about the band The Doors, but more so about the lead singer, Jim Morrison. I didn't really know anything about this band before watching the movie, but it's a very good film. Great performance from Val Kilmer in the lead role. That's probably the best thing about the film is Val Kilmer's performance. It's a solid film, but it's not a movie that I'd see myself returning to too often. But definitely see it for Val Kilmer's performance. I'm going to put it in the B tier because I don't think it's as rewatchable as some of his other films. It's also a bit overlong, but great performance, some really good songs, and really interesting sequences and scenes in the film. Next, we have one of his Vietnam War films, and it's Born on the 4th of July. This is one that I own on Blu-ray and one that I had seen prior to watching all his films, and it stars Tom Cruise. It's a really solid film, and it kind of starts out you don't actually get much war footage in this film, because it's more so about this character who's been injured and it's his struggles after the war rather than focusing on the actual war period. So it is a good movie. Again, I think it's a little bit overlong. I'd probably put it in the same category as The Doors, but above The Doors. So I'll put it in the B tier, but up high. It is a good film, though. Next, we have World Trade Center from 2006. I think most of his films he made in the 2000s and since haven't been that great, besides one or two, which I'll get to. But World Trade Center for me was a bit underwhelming. You got Nicolas Cage and Michael Pena, but the movie should have been a bit more, memorable, I guess. It didn't do too much for me. It's just focusing on these two injured firefighters and their journey to kind of get out of the rubble if they're gonna make it out alive or not. But it was just okay, kind of a just okay film. So I'm going to put it in the C tier because I did enjoy it when I watched it, but I didn't think it was anything too special. Next up, we have one of the most divisive films of his career, another one from the 2000s, and that's Alexander. So this film is hated by a lot of people, but then there are people who love it as well. I never got around to really watching it. I remember seeing bits and pieces of it when I was younger because a friend of mine really loves the movie, but I never watched it fully until a couple months ago, and I watched the revised or revisited cut, which is like 3.5 hours long. It's super long. And to be honest, I actually really thoroughly enjoyed the film. There's things about it that aren't good. Colin Farrell's performance is very up and down, so he has moments of greatness, I feel like, in the film, but then there's these moments that are just pretty awful as well. A lot of the side characters are also pretty average and not really developed that much. The battle sequences are incredible. The musical score is incredible by Vangelis. There's so much I like about this movie. It kind of feels like a big jumbled mess, but to be honest, I feel like I'm a defender of this film now. I actually really enjoyed Alexander when I watched it a few months ago. I bought it on Blu-ray, so yeah, that tells you kind of how I feel about it. I do like these big sweeping scale sword and sandal films like this and Gladiator and Kingdom of Heaven and Troy, those kind of movies. And I really enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I was going to this time around. So I'm going to actually put it up the top of the A tier. Again, it's not quite an S tier film. There are things holding it back, but I think it's a really good movie. Next up, we have one of his best films, and that's Natural Born Killers. This is straight up into the S tier for me. This is just an insanely fun movie. It's super dark at the same time as being very funny and over the top. There's some really funny sequences here, but Woody Harrelson's great. Juliette Lewis is great. She kind of made this whole string of fantastic movies in the early 90s as well, and she's really good here again. The film was written by Quentin Tarantino, or kind of based off of his original story, so that's pretty cool too, and you can definitely see that influence in the film. It's also got my favourite Tommy Lee Jones performance here as the prison warden. I think he's like absolutely hilarious and so cartoonish and over the top in every scene he's in, and they're my favourite parts about the movie, to be honest. It's like, it's an insane movie and it's a messy movie, and it experiments with all these different filming styles and types, which keeps it fun and fresh. But yeah, it's not a light film at all. It's very intense, very dark, very heavy, while also being funny. So it kind of walks the line, but it seems to pull it off pretty well. I really like the film. Next, we have his most recent film, Snowden, which I just saw last night for the first time. I put it off for a while because I'd heard it was kind of boring and overlong, and I wasn't super keen on the idea of it. But to be honest, I really enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I was going to. Joseph Gordon-Levitt was great. After seeing the real Edward Snowden guy, I think his performance was spot on. The film was really interesting. A lot of people say, well, I've heard some reviews saying it's boring and overlong, but I actually found it to be the perfect length and entertaining and interesting the whole time. And it actually started to build as it went on, because the film goes back and forward between, when he's working in the CIA and discovering all these things and stuff that he's not comfortable doing and working with, to when he becomes this whistleblower and eventually is on the run. And I thought it was great. I really enjoyed the film a lot. I think it's a really solid film. It's not an S tier film, but to be honest, I think it might be an A tier film. I'm going to put it in the A tier. It might end up at the bottom of the A tier, but I still think it's good enough to just make it into the A tier. If not, it's a very high B tier film. But I would recommend it for those of you who haven't seen it and have maybe been putting it off, because I thought it was really good. Next, we have another one of his better films, and that's Talk Radio. This is another one from that late 80s period where he was kind of on a roll. And this is very different from anything else he's done. To me, it kind of feels a little bit like a Hitchcock thriller, because it takes place in one location in like this this live radio studio with this character who is pretty despicable and pretty unlikable as the lead character, which is quite risky to do. And you're with him for pretty much the whole film as well. But it's just a really interesting and intriguing movie. The kind of hatred towards him develops as the movie goes on through the people he's talking to over the radio and over the phone. And it builds up to a really fantastic ending as well. And I thought it was a great thriller, really intense and unique in its setting, and something different that Oliver Stone doesn't really do too much. And I thought, to be honest, I think it's one of his best films. I'm going to put it in the S tier for his movies. And I would like to get it on Blu-ray as well one day. I think it's definitely worth it. And if you haven't seen Talk Radio, I know not a lot of people that I know talk about it or know of it, but definitely check it out if you get the chance. Next, we have Salvador, which came out in 1986, the same year that he did Platoon. And it's not as big or popular as Platoon, but I really remember enjoying this film quite a bit. I watched it maybe 4 or 5 months ago now, and I enjoyed it quite a lot. And I feel like this is where his career as a filmmaker really began, with this film and Platoon. The two movies he made before it were kind of experimental horror films that didn't really work for me. But Salvador was a really good movie about a photojournalist who's in South America, I think, or Mexico. And he's in these really dangerous conditions and situations, just trying to survive and trying to capture these photojournalism photos that he wants to publish and things about this escalating kind of, I don't know if it's a civil war or some kind of conflict that's going on there. I can't really remember too much now, but I do remember enjoying it a lot. Enough to put in the B tier, I'd say. I'm going to put it between Born on the 4th of July and The Doors, because I did enjoy it quite a bit. Next, we have a more recent one from 2008, W. So this is one of his more political films. Like, he did a few about presidents, like obviously JFK and Nixon, and then W. This one's not as good as those other two films. Josh Brolin's great here as George Bush. The film was more lighthearted and fun than his other political government films, and it was good, but it kind of felt a little bit minor in comparison to those other ones, which kind of let it down a bit for me. But for a breezy, fun 2 hours, I think it worked well and is one of his better recent films, though it's not great by any means. To be honest, I still think it's a B tier film, so I'm going to chuck it at the bottom of the B tier. Josh Brolin was really good in the role and had a lot of fun with it, I could tell. But yeah, it wasn't as good as his other political ones that we'll get into soon. Speaking of, we have JFK next from 91. So this one doesn't really obviously focus on the presidency and the life of John F. Kennedy. It's pretty much all surrounding his assassination and the conspiracies around it. You've got Kevin Costner here. He's excellent. The movie is over 3 hours long. It's like 3.5 hours long if you watch the director's cut, which I have, and I think it's fantastic. Like, I watched it a few months ago for the first time, expecting big things because I'd heard it was his best film. I love Kevin Costner. I love conspiracy thriller kind of films. I didn't know too much about the JFK assassination. Obviously, I've seen the footage and that a million times before, but I knew there were certain conspiracies floating around, and this movie really delves deep into a lot of them. And it's super interesting. Like, I was not bored for 1 minute during the 3.5 hours, and I think that really speaks volumes about the film. It's easily his best film as a director, in my opinion, so top of the S tier for JFK. I'd recommend it to anyone. I even showed my family, who usually can't stand long political kind of films. They more like would love Jim Carrey or Ben Stiller comedies, but they actually really enjoyed this film too. So that goes to show that it's actually a really solid piece of filmmaking, and he made it the same year he did The Doors as well. So that's pretty impressive to be able to knock off two films like that in 1 year. So next up, we have another 90s film, which is Any Given Sunday, and this is the only kind of time he's really delved into, say, like a sports genre, because it focuses on American football. You've got Al Pacino, who's a great actor. I really love him. Cameron Diaz, who was quite good here. But the film overall, I just thought was okay. Like, it was good. I think it's solid enough to be in the B tier. I'll put it in the B tier above W. It was entertaining. It was quite dark at times. Kind of goes behind the scenes of all the glitz and glam, I guess, of being a football star and things like that. I don't remember loving it too much, but I do remember enjoying it for what it was. I think it's a solid B tier. Next, we have another one of his three Vietnam War films, and this is Heaven and Earth. This is quite different from Platoon and from Born on the 4th of July. It also focuses on a Vietnamese girl and her journey as she lives in this village at the start of the film when the war's breaking out, and then she moves to Saigon, I think, and then she marries Tommy Lee Jones's character and moves back to the US. And so there's quite a bit of change going on throughout this film. And to be honest, I really loved like the first 45 minutes of the film when it was in her village. I thought it was fantastic. Like, the first act of the movie in the village was amazing, and it's S tier as far as I'm concerned, but then the film kind of drops the ball after that. And it's still an entertaining and good film, but I just think it didn't keep that kind of, I don't know, I just felt like the first 40 minutes of the film were like perfection pretty much, and then it kind of dropped the ball a bit. So it was unfortunate because I was really loving how it opened up. But still, I think overall it's a solid B tier film. I'll put it above The Doors even, because I liked it quite a bit. And not a lot of people have seen this one as well, from what I hear. It's not one of his most well-known films or anything. Next up, we have Nixon. So this is obviously another one of his political films on a president. I didn't know anything about Nixon. It's another 3-hour plus film. I wasn't super excited to see it, but man, it was amazing. Like, Anthony Hopkins is great here. He's always fantastic, but he was excellent. And again, for someone who's not really into politics or knows much about American political presidents or figures, to watch a 3-hour plus film on a president that I barely knew anything about, other than obviously like the Watergate scandal, and to be super entertained by it. Like, I really loved Nixon. I thought it was a great film, and it's another one that I'm going to put in the A tier. I'll put it above Wall Street even. I thought it was very good, and it's a film I can see myself watching again. I don't have it on Blu-ray, but I would like to get it one day. I thought it was really good and entertaining, and did a great job of just showing the humanity behind this kind of person as he kind of started to crumble pretty much. It was pretty much showing how his presidency just began to crumble and fall apart, but it was very interesting and I really enjoyed it a lot. I'll try and speed this up a bit because we're going over time. Next we have The Hand. So this is one of those other early 80s horror films that he made before he really became a filmmaker, in my opinion. The Hand is considerably better than Seizure. However, it's still much worse than his other work, so I'm going to put it in the D tier. It starred Michael Caine, and it was a really silly, stupid film about a guy who loses his hand and then the hand's still alive and it's like haunting him and other people. So it's a really stupid horror comedy. Not even really a comedy. It's not. It takes itself a bit too serious for what it is. It is more entertaining though than Seizure, so it's gonna go in the D tier, but it's really not worth watching. Next we have Platoon, so another one of those early 80s films that's really good. The first Vietnam War film he did, mostly based on his personal experience in the war. So it's really interesting to see. I have this on Blu-ray. I really enjoyed this film. I think it's one of the better war films. I really enjoy the Vietnam War films, and this is one of the best ones, I think. It's definitely a solid A tier film. I'll chuck that up there. Next we have U-Turn. This is a thriller, weird, bizarre kind of thriller that he made in the 90s with Sean Penn, and I think it was Nick Nolte in it. Yeah, but I wasn't huge on this film. I thought it was a bit too silly and too over the top. It was entertaining enough, but it didn't do too much for me. Still, I think it's probably deserving of a C tier, but I'll put it below. I might put it above World Trade Center. It was a bit more unique and interesting, so in the C tier. Next we have Wall Street, Money Never Sleeps, so the sequel to the original film that didn't actually need a sequel. Unfortunately, the sequel let me down quite a bit. We've got Gordon Gekko back, but he's nowhere near as interesting here. You've got Shia LaBeouf, who it focuses on more, who's dating Michael Douglas's daughter in the film, but the movie it just lacked everything that the first film had. It's a completely unnecessary sequel. It wasn't a terrible film or anything like that, but it just made me want to watch the first movie because of how much I wasn't really into this one. Again, though, it wasn't terrible. I'll probably put it in the C tier at the bottom, though. Last but not least, we have Savages from 2012. This film was a jumbled mess. It was all over the place. There was a lot of... It's probably one of his most violent films. It kind of felt like he was trying to make an 80s action film, but in 2012, and the cast wasn't really great or likable at all. I didn't really latch on to any of the characters. The ending did this really stupid thing where it makes you think something's been happening for a long time, and then it replays as what's really been happening, but it was a real kind of letdown and fizzled out for me. It wasn't too bad. Like, it's again probably another C tier film, to be honest. I'll put it above Wall Street, but it wasn't very good. So that's it, guys. That's all 20 of Oliver Stone's films. He's a really interesting filmmaker. I like a lot of his movies. Anything in the S and A tier is fantastic. The whole B tier is solid as well, but everything in the C and below is kind of average. But to be honest, look, like from the scale here, he's got mostly really good films. And if you haven't seen any of those ones, please check them out. Rank what you've seen below. And yeah, please subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.